Okay, welcome back, guys. So we're going to close out the use cases with this last one, and this one's about canonicals. So I'm sure if you know about SEO and you've done SEO, you're probably familiar with the idea of canonicals. But just as a refresher, if we basically go into a page and we have duplicate content where we have two pages that are pretty similar, it's basically a tag that we add to a page to tell the search engine that these pages may be similar, and to avoid giving like duplicate content issues or to avoid having both compete with one another in search results, the canonical tag would basically say, hey, I'm a copy of this other page. And it's a good sign for the search engines to be able to understand like how to treat those in search results and pass authority over. So it's really kind of how do you manage duplicate content by still allowing the pages to be visible. You can still access them, bookmark. The user can still access both URLs. So with a redirect, you can't do that because one page basically consolidates into two pages consolidated into one. With a canonical, you can have both pages still alive and well and bookmarked, fully accessible. But in terms of SEO, you can avoid the issue of them competing against one another through that tag. So the way that I normally would look for canonicals is basically to go into the site and spot check through source code. And that's simply going right click, view source, control F, and then typing something like canonical, right? And then you can see that these pages do have a canonical reference, etc. So Screaming Frog can actually make that whole process a lot easier because it gives you obviously all pages of your site. Here we're going to filter just to HTML pages again. I'm in the internal tab and I have a list of all our pages here. But I also have the canonical link, so it's extracting that from the text itself. Now, what's helpful here is when you go to the far right, you can see the canonical elements on the right. And here we go, canonicals. So here what this does, it breaks it down. So I can see that I have about 15,000 total canonicals. Now, only 775 are self-referencing, which basically means the canonical is basically pointing to itself and saying, I'm a copy of myself, which those really don't do much, so we normally will skip over those. But the ones that are canonicalized, those are the ones we want to look at because basically if it's self-referencing, the two columns are exactly the same, which you can see here. These should be exactly the same, right? Column A, column B. When they're canonicalized, normally the way that this is handled on e-commerce sites is really messy URLs are canonicalized to really clean URLs, which is exactly what we see here, right? Really messy on the left-hand side because of those parameters from the facet navigation to really clean and straightforward URLs on the right-hand side, okay? So what I like to do with this, because this can get really messy really fast with all the columns of data that you have, is within the plus sign, narrow this down a little bit. Okay, so what I like to do is just kind of clean this up and only keep the elements that could be useful here. So I need to get out of the canonical tab and go back into internal. Now, if I was just in regular internal, I'm going to have all of this data. So what I've done is I've gone through and basically unchecked all of them so that I'm only left with the data sets that are useful to me here. And what I want to basically see is, answer a couple of questions. Do we use canonicals? Yes. Do we use them correctly? It appears so. We don't probably need the self-referencing canonicals, but where canonicals are used, where they're not self-referencing, it looks like they're correct. And I can see other information here, which is the value of kind of narrowing that view here, because I'm pulling in API data. So if I had Google Search Console set up, I could actually see if pages that are being canonicalized are getting any traffic. So these pages, again, they're both alive and well. So it's just a signal and a hint to Google to just show one over the other. And we're giving Google the hint that we want this particular column to show up over this particular column. But with the API connection with Google Search Console and Google Analytics, we can actually see how much traffic do we get for both of these columns of URLs. So we can see if they truly are working. And we can also see rank data. So we can see if this particular URL outranks this particular URL. So we can see the effectiveness of the canonical tags. You can also get things like page response time, performance scores, etc. Now keep in mind that this data here is for these URLs. So it's the address that's being evaluated. Okay, so for me to get this data, I would need to copy all of these and rerun them, the whole row, and rerun them as a list. Okay, because these are the destinations of the canonical, right? So this data here in these columns is coming from these URLs. So essentially, when you're bringing in Google Search Console data, these should be 0. The page authority should be really low on these pages, but many of these are not. So I would either consider maybe redirecting these so that you can fully transfer the equity over to the canonical link element, to the canonical page, or there could be a few other things that could be done. Like you could block the parameters, or you could block these pages from being crawled so that the equity and the concentration of the crawl gets put towards these URLs. But if you want to see the value of these pages compared to these pages, then you would have to copy these and again run those as a list up in mode. Okay, and then you can compare and see, like, these pages should get the search impressions and the clicks and the high ranking, which you can pull in from the Google Search Console API, and these should not. But in the case of where they do, then there could be some issues with canonicals. There's also in bulk exports, there's the canonical reports that you can get as well too if you want to break that down into specific reports. And there's also some reports here for canonical chains and pages that aren't indexed that are canonicalized. So you can really slice this up in a lot of different ways, whichever tailors to what you're looking for. All right, so we'll see you in the next section.